Cassandra Hayes had always been the quiet one, the invisible sister in a family of ruthless, ambitious overachievers. Her older brother, Thomas, was a brash visionary with a talent for sales. Her younger sister, Elise, was a sharp-tongued strategist with a taste for the spotlight. Together they ran Hayes Innovations, a tech empire built on sleek products and polished marketing. And Cassandra, their overlooked sibling, was the assistant, the quiet one who organized meetings, fetched coffee, and was never given credit for her contributions. What no one outside the company knew was that Cassandra had been the architect of its success from the beginning. She was the mind behind the software breakthroughs, the algorithm refinements, the supply chain optimizations. Every major innovation that had put Hayes Innovations ahead of its competitors had originated in her meticulous notebooks, her midnight emails, her whispered suggestions in boardrooms where she was ignored. Thomas and Elise were experts at stealing her ideas, repackaging them as their own, and reaping the rewards. They mocked her behind closed doors, dismissing her as just the assistant, someone too meek to challenge them, too loyal to betray them. But labor proceed. Cassandra's quiet demeanor wasn't weakness. It was a mask. Beneath it was a razor-sharp mind that had grown cold and calculating after years of betrayal. She had stopped hoping for recognition. She had stopped asking for fairness. Instead, she had started planning. For years, she gathered information, financial statements, shareholder lists, internal memos, digital traces of the deals her siblings made in the shadows. She watched as they siphoned profits into private accounts, as they silenced dissenting voices with legal threats. She cataloged every dirty trick, every stolen idea, every betrayal. And she waited. The opportunity came when Thomas and Elise, drunk on their own arrogance, decided to launch a major acquisition that would push Hayes Innovations into global dominance. They needed capital, more than they could raise through conventional channels. They made deals with hedge funds, leveraged company assets, and issued new shares to dilute existing ownership. They thought they were consolidating power, they thought they were cementing their legacy. But Cassandra was already 10 steps ahead. Through a network of shell companies, silent partners, and proxy investors, she began quietly buying up shares. Small blocks at first, spread across different names, different jurisdictions. No one noticed. No one questioned the assistant's occasional late-night calls or her sudden interest in learning about the market. By the time the acquisition papers were signed, Cassandra held the keys to the kingdom. The day the news broke, Thomas and Elise were in the boardroom, celebrating their triumph. They laughed, toasted champagne, and gloated over their victory. The press releases were ready, the media blitz coordinated. Cassandra entered the room quietly, carrying a stack of papers. Thomas barely glanced at her. "Not now, Cass," he said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Elise sneered. "Seriously, we're a little busy running a company here." Cassandra set the papers on the table and stepped back. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear. "You should read those." Thomas sighed dramatically, snatching the top sheet. His eyes skimmed the text. His brow furrowed. He read deeper, flipping through the pages. Elise leaned over his shoulder, her expression twisting from irritation to disbelief. "What is this?" she snapped. "Some kind of joke?" Cassandra met their stunned gazes, her expression unreadable. "It's not a joke. It's a notice of majority ownership transfer. As of this morning, I hold controlling interest in Hayes Innovations, effective immediately." Thomas's face turned red. "That's impossible. We control the shares." "You diluted your own shares during the acquisition," Cassandra said softly. "You opened the door. All I had to do was walk through it, and I did." Elise's mouth opened and closed, her hands trembling. "You're the assistant. You don't know anything about business." Cassandra's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I know enough to clean up your messes, enough to keep this company afloat while you played king and queen. And now, I know enough to take it all from you." Thomas lunged across the table, knocking over glasses and papers, but Cassandra stepped back, her composure unshaken. Security, already briefed and prepared, entered the room and intercepted him before he could reach her. "This is a hostile takeover," he snarled. Cassandra's voice was low, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. "No, Thomas, this is a reckoning." As the boardroom erupted in chaos, Cassandra stood calmly, watching her siblings flail against the web she had spun. She had been the invisible sister, the assistant they'd mocked. But now, she was the majority shareholder, the true power behind Hayes Innovations. And she was just getting started. The aftermath of the boardroom coup rippled through Hayes Innovations like a shockwave. The carefully staged photo shoots, the glowing press releases, the congratulatory interviews scheduled with Thomas and Elise, all crumbled under the weight of Cassandra's silent hand. They scrambled, of course. Thomas tried to call in favors from board members he'd groomed, from investors he'd entertained with empty promises. Elise launched legal threats, flooding the company's legal department with demands to challenge the ownership transfer. But it was no use. Cassandra's maneuver was airtight. Every share, every transaction, every proxy had been traced and secured with a precision they never imagined from their precision. For days, the office buzzed with whispered rumors. Employees speculated, nervously watching the balance of power shift before their eyes. The assistant, who had fetched coffee, who had been invisible at meetings, now sat at the head of the conference table. Cassandra didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or pound her fists. She let the silence speak for her, let the dread of uncertainty suffocate her siblings. Thomas raged, storming through the building, his voice echoing down marble corridors. He confronted Cassandra in the executive suite, demanding an explanation. "You think you can just waltz in and take everything we built?" he shouted, his face red with fury. "You're nothing without us. You always were." Cassandra looked up from her tablet, her expression calm. "I built this," she said. "You just signed the papers." Elise barged in, her makeup smeared, her voice shrill. "We'll crush you in court. You won't get away with this. You don't know what you're doing." Cassandra's lips curled into a faint, cold smile. "You're welcome to try, but I have the receipts, I have the documents, and I have the loyalty of everyone you stepped on to get here." Their attempts to rally the company's departments failed spectacularly. Cassandra had spent years quietly building relationships with the real workers, the engineers, the designers, the support staff. They had always seen her as the calm hand that kept the company running when Thomas and Elise were too busy basking in the spotlight. Now they flocked to her side, their silent gratitude transforming into unwavering support. Cassandra didn't fire Thomas and Elise, not immediately. Instead, she made them report to her. She assigned them to meaningless projects, had them present to her in meetings where she shredded their proposals with quiet precision. She scheduled long, humiliating reviews where she dissected every weakness in their ideas, every sloppy shortcut they'd taken over the years. They endured it at first, convinced it was temporary. But days turned to weeks, and Cassandra's grip only tightened. She had them moved from the penthouse offices to cramped cubicles. Their key cards were restricted, their access to company funds was cut. She canceled their personal credit lines linked to the company and revoked their executive perks. She made them feel, with every small indignity, what it was like to be powerless. And all the while she maintained her poise, never raising her voice, never uttering a threat. Her revenge was methodical, cold, and devastating. One night, Cassandra sat alone in the corner office. Her office now, overlooking the city. The skyline glittered, but her thoughts were miles away. She wasn't done, not yet. Thomas and Elise had stolen more than credit. They had driven the company to the brink of ruin with their reckless decisions, lining their pockets while she worked to keep the foundation from collapsing. It was time to make sure they could never claw their way back. The next phase of her plan was already in motion. She had traced the hidden accounts Thomas and Elise had set up in offshore havens, accounts stuffed with embezzled company funds. She had the evidence of their fraudulent contracts, the bribes to secure government deals, the falsified reports that boosted their public image while masking their financial crimes. All she had to do was release it. But she wasn't ready to strike just yet. First, she wanted to watch them squirm a little longer. So she sent them anonymous hints, encrypted emails with fragments of their own documents, anonymous messages slipped under their office doors, glimpses of their own sins reflected back at them. Thomas grew paranoid, snapping at his assistant, demanding full audits of his personal accounts. Elise became frantic, obsessively combing through her old files, trying to erase the evidence she thought was hidden. But it was too late. Cassandra controlled the flow of information, and with each passing day, she tightened the noose a little more. The siblings who had stolen her ideas, who had mocked her as just the assistant, were now trapped in her web, and she wasn't done weaving. Thomas and Elise's descent into panic was a slow-motion unraveling, and Cassandra watched every step with cold precision. They had built their power on stolen ideas and empty promises, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath them. She didn't rush the collapse. She wanted them to feel it. The dread, the helplessness, the realization that they were no longer in control. The hints she sent became more frequent, more specific. A scanned copy of an illicit transfer Thomas had made from a company account into his personal offshore fund. A blurry photo of Elise's falsified contract with a supplier she had secretly partnered with to skim profits. These weren't accusations. They were statements of fact, impossible to deny, delivered like daggers to pierce through their smug defenses. They tried to cover their tracks, of course. Thomas paid a digital forensics firm to wipe his accounts, while Elise called in old favors, leaning on crooked accountants to erase the paper trail. But Cassandra had already anticipated their moves. Every file they deleted, every log they erased, she had copies safely encrypted and hidden. She let them struggle, knowing their efforts only deepened the trap. The board members, sensing the shift in power, began aligning with Cassandra. They admired her quiet competence, her ability to keep the company afloat through the chaos her siblings had created. They saw her not as the assistant, but as the force keeping the empire standing. Some of them whispered behind closed doors, expressing regret at having overlooked her for so long. She accepted their apologies with a faint smile, but never forgot their complicity. One morning, Thomas stormed into her office, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. He slammed a folder onto her desk. "This is everything you have on me," he hissed. "Delete it. Now. We'll start over. Clean slate." Cassandra didn't flinch. She opened the folder, scanning the pages with mild interest, as if they were the morning's stock reports. "You're missing a few documents," she said softly. "Would you like me to send you the full set?" Thomas's hands trembled. "You'll destroy everything. You'll ruin us." "I'm not destroying anything," she said. "You're doing that yourself. I'm just letting the truth surface." Elise wasn't far behind. She cornered Cassandra in the elevator, her voice shrill with desperation. "Please," she said, her nails digging into Cassandra's arm. "This will kill us. We'll lose everything." Cassandra gently pried Elise's hand away. "I lost everything when you two took what was mine," she said. "Now it's your turn." That night, Cassandra initiated the final phase. She compiled a dossier containing every piece of evidence: embezzlement, fraud, bribery, the shadow contracts. It was complete, comprehensive, impossible to refute. She prepared a press release for the media, an anonymous submission to regulatory bodies, and an encrypted delivery to law enforcement. But before hitting send, she summoned Thomas and Elise to the boardroom. The room was empty except for the three of them. No assistants, no guards, just the siblings, face to face. They arrived disheveled and tense, expecting a confrontation. Cassandra stood at the head of the table, a tablet in hand. "You have one last choice," she said. "You can resign quietly, transfer all remaining shares to me, and disappear. Or I send this," she tapped the tablet, "and the world sees who you really are." Thomas's lips tightened. Elise's eyes darted wildly, calculating, searching for a way out, but there was none. "I built this company," Cassandra said quietly. "I saved it when you were too busy stealing, and now it's mine." There was a long silence. Finally, Thomas sagged into a chair, defeated. Elise wept silently beside him. They signed the papers Cassandra had prepared, their hands shaking as they transferred their shares, their control, their legacy. Cassandra watched them leave the boardroom, their steps heavy with the weight of ruin. She waited until the door closed behind them before turning to the window, gazing out over the city. The company was hers, completely. And she had done it without raising her voice, without a single public confrontation. But she wasn't finished. There was one more step to make sure her siblings could never rise again. Cassandra sat alone in the boardroom long after Thomas and Elise had fled, their signatures on the transfer papers still fresh and wet with ink. Outside, the city shimmered under the glow of streetlights and neon, oblivious to the quiet coup that had just taken place. But for Cassandra, it wasn't over, not yet. She had spent years in the shadows, her brilliance silenced, her ideas stolen. She had endured the condescending smirks, the whispered jokes behind her back, the quiet rage of watching her work paraded under someone else's name. It wasn't enough to take back what was hers. She needed to ensure they could never, ever claw their way back. The evidence she had compiled against Thomas and Elise wasn't just leverage, it was a weapon. Quietly, she forwarded the full dossier to federal regulators and law enforcement agencies, her identity carefully masked, anonymous but undeniable. The files painted a damning picture: financial crimes, fraudulent contracts, bribes, shell companies, an entire architecture of deceit that couldn't be ignored. Within days, the first subpoenas were issued, investigations were launched, banks froze accounts, former allies distanced themselves as news outlets devoured the scandal. Thomas was arrested in his penthouse, cameras flashing as agents escorted him out in handcuffs. Elise was found in a luxury suite, disoriented and drunk, her lawyer unable to shield her from the avalanche of charges. Cassandra didn't need to lift a finger. The truth was a predator, and it had finally been set loose. As the public scandal deepened, Cassandra took her place as the new CEO of Hayes Innovations. The board, previously skeptical, now rallied around her, eager to align themselves with the architect of the company's survival. She moved decisively, restructuring departments, promoting loyal staff, and eliminating the waste and corruption her siblings had nurtured. She also made sure to quietly reach out to the employees her siblings had wronged, the designers whose ideas had been buried, the engineers passed over for promotions, the managers forced out for questioning unethical deals. One by one, she brought them back, restoring not just their positions, but their dignity. The company's stock stabilized, investor confidence returned. Clients, wary at first, were reassured by Cassandra's competence and calm leadership. Slowly, Hayes Innovations began to shed the taint of Thomas and Elise's corruption and rebuild its reputation on a foundation Cassandra had secretly laid years before. And as for her siblings? Thomas spent his days in a cramped cell, awaiting trial, his empire reduced to fragments. His lawyers fought desperately to salvage his fortune, but the evidence was overwhelming. Elise fared no better. Her socialite friends abandoned her, her assets seized, her public persona dismantled by the relentless flood of scandal. Neither of them spoke her name, not in court, not in interviews. Their pride, once so loud, was now a hushed echo of the arrogance they had carried for years. Cassandra never visited them. She didn't need to. She had already taken everything that mattered. Months later, she stood at the top floor of the company's headquarters, looking down at the city she now controlled. The sun was rising, bathing the buildings in a soft golden light. She took a deep breath, the air crisp and cool against her skin. She had built this, brick by brick, idea by idea. She had created a legacy that no one could take from her. And now, the world finally knew it. The quiet sister, the overlooked assistant, had not just survived, she had conquered, and she would never be overlooked again.